Tonight, 3 elderly males are the latest victims of COVID-19 as Jamaica recorded 207 new cases of the virus yesterday. Prime Minister announces that travelers who require state quarantine will now be asked to pay for their own expenses.
As a matter of policy, the government cannot continue to do this. And so if it becomes necessary for state quarantine to be implemented, then those persons who would be so affected to take this now as notice that you would have to be prepared to pay.
Still tonight, NWA halts activities on a section of the Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project being implemented in St. Andrew, St. Thomas, and Portland. And Shadow Minister of Labour and Social Security calls on the government to retable the Occupation, Health and Safety Bill and appoint a new Joint Select Committee, JSC, to consider this legislation. Good evening. 3 elderly males are the latest victims of COVID-19 as Jamaica recorded 207 new cases of the virus yesterday. Now, this takes the island's death toll to 362 and the total of confirmed cases since the outbreak of the virus to 17,908. The recently deceased are a 76-year-old male from St. James and 2 males aged 87 and 70 years from St. Elizabeth. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Health and Wellness says the new cases consist of 85 males and 122 females, ranging in age from 2 days to 92 years. The cases were recorded in Kingston and St. Andrew with 72 cases, St. Catherine recorded 38 cases, Manchester 33 cases, Clarendon 21, St. Elizabeth 11 cases, Portland and St. Thomas recorded 7 cases each, Hanover, St. Mary, Trelawney and Westmoreland recorded 4 cases each, while St. Anne and St. James recorded 1 case each. The island also recorded 44 recoveries, taking the total of recovered persons now to 12,406. In other news tonight, the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, PSOJ, says that while tightened measures are necessary in the wake of the spike in positive COVID-19 cases and the current strain on the public health system, the reduction in working hours as a result of the new 8 p.m. nightly curfew could see some reversal of the recent economic gains and the recovery of jobs. Now, in yesterday's sitting of the House of Representatives, Prime Minister Andrew Holness announced a new nightly curfew beginning at 8 p.m. until 5 a.m. daily. The previous curfew began at 10 p.m. The PSOG says it is of the view that there should be greater emphasis on compliance and enforcement, as this is a more sustainable approach to controlling the spread of the virus without further curtailing business activity. The PSOG says proposals have been made by the government for the development of a ticketing system to increase compliance, as this is where our greatest challenge resides. The private sector group said, quote, "We implore the government to fast-track this effort of enforcement and compliance through the issuing of tickets with prohibitive fines for non-compliance, as we are all painfully aware that the Jamaica Constabulary Force has real capacity constraints. The enforcement measures could be supplemented by the Transport Authority, the municipal police and special district constables," end quote. Now, the organization also pointed out that they recognize that even with the addition of these resources, there may still be human resource constraints to effectively manage this ticketing system. The PSOG says it is therefore willing to complement these efforts through partnerships with security firms. Now, while speaking during yesterday's sitting of the House of Representatives, Prime Minister Andrew Holness says legislation to implement a ticketing system for breaches of the coronavirus COVID-19 protocols will be brought to the Houses of Parliament shortly.
We have been discussing the implementation of new legislation for ticketing and for giving the security forces greater enforcement powers. I in my conversation with the Minister of Justice, the legislation is complete in terms of its drafting, and by next week it should be with the Legislative Committee for final approval. It should be in the House by the first sitting of the new parliamentary year. And hopefully, if it suits all the members, if it meets our approval, we can pass it very quickly and have that in force. That will assist, though not totally solve, but certainly it would be another tool at the disposal of our security forces in implementing under the Disaster Risk Management Act.
Still tonight, Prime Minister Andrew Holness has also announced that travelers who require state quarantine will now be asked to pay for their own expenses, as the government can no longer foot these bills.
The government of Jamaica has been very generous, very considerate, and it has come at great cost to taxpayers that when we have to put in place state quarantine, the government pays, and we have been paying. Madam Speaker, as a matter of policy, the government cannot continue to do this. And so if it becomes necessary for state quarantine to be implemented, then those persons who would be so affected should take this now as notice that you would have to be prepared to pay. I'm quite sensitive to the thinking of my Jamaican people in these matters, in that, you know, the sense of empathy, the sense of understanding for the poor is that the government should pay. We have done it for as long as we can because there is an economic reality which we will see in the budget to come. In other countries that have implemented the quarantine, it is the person who has been issued the order that has to pay. Certainly, if it becomes necessary for the government to put in place state quarantine, then we will ensure that the costs are affordable. And it may not necessarily be that the person would pay the full economic costs, but there would be some cost attributable to the person.
Now the announcement comes days after Minister of Health and Wellness Dr. Christopher Tufton announced that the government will cover the required expenses in the event of an adverse reaction to the COVID-19 vaccine. The health minister said while the government has granted indemnity to manufacturers, AstraZeneca, it is making plans to protect citizens from the possible ill effects of the vaccine. He also said the vaccine has proven to be safe and is only expected to provide an adverse effect in minor cases. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Holness announced that over 150 samples will be sent off by the end of this week for genome testing to see if the new variants of the COVID-19 virus has reached our shores.
The Ministry of Health and Wellness has advised that as part of their surveillance activities on new variants, they have sent off for genome testing, genome sequencing, 14 positive samples from travelers from the UK. And later this week, they plan to send off another 101 samples randomly selected by parish. The results from genome sequencing will give us better insights into how prevalent the new variants, if they exist, may be in Jamaica. So as at this point, we can't say definitively that there is a spread of it. We're just sending off samples to get them tested. So hopefully by next week we would be able to report to the Parliament as to whether or not the various strains that we are hearing about that might be more virulent than the current strain that we are aware of, whether or not that is in the population and is contributing to the increasing number of infections.
The Prime Minister further responded to questions of whether the increase in cases is as a result of increased testing.
While we have certainly increased our testing capacity, it is important to note that we have not changed our testing criteria. Our testing has always been based on our surveillance and is focused on suspected cases either as a result of symptoms or contact tracing. We don't rely on random testing. My friends opposite would welcome the fact that we are increasing testing. And that is as a result of, and I have been consistent in also agreeing that, yes, we have to increase capacity, and it takes a little time to do that. One of the issues that we faced was that the resources for testing are highly competitive. They're not just off the shelf. You have to order them, they have to be produced, and the reagents, that is a commodity that is in high demand. But we now have improved our testing capabilities with machine-ready equipment, and we recently received new supplies of reagents. So we are in a much better situation now for testing. And from a statistical point of view, you would know that as you increase your sample size and you increase the repetition of a test, you get closer to what is the expected result. And then the variance becomes much smaller. So there is a point at which testing doesn't give you any new policy information.
Still making the news tonight, 2 police constables who were charged in relation to the alleged beating of a man in Western Kingston in 2019 are to return to the Kingston and St. Andrew Parish Court on March 2. Constables Tevin Lake and Kenroy Chambers are facing the charge of assault occasioning bodily harm stemming from an incident on October 13 in the vicinity of Regent Street, Kingston 14. Videos of the beating went viral and sparked a demonstration and outrage. Now, yesterday, when the matter was mentioned, the constables who were summoned before the court were bound over to return by the judge. In the video that went viral on social media at the time of the incident, police officers appearing to be in a heated exchange with the complainant were seen following closely on the heels of the complainant, who was descending a flight of stairs of a high-rise building in the Denham town community. Now, upon reaching the ground floor, the complainant and the lawmen were seen walking a short distance before a tussle ensued. The complainant was then thrown to the ground by the police officers. While there, he received several blows from the constables before one of them stomped on his head. Continuing with the news tonight, the Westmoreland police have launched a search of the parish for 6 armed men who yesterday held up the White House branch of the Community Workers of Jamaica Credit Union Bank of cash amounting to over $5 million. Now, investigators say the incident took place at approximately 12:30 p.m. during peak business hours. Reports coming into our news center tonight are that 6 men wearing COVID-19 masks entered the establishment posing as customers. The men then brandished handguns and held the security guard and other occupants at gunpoint. The robbers also proceeded to rob cash estimated to be in the region of over $5 million before making off with the security guard's firearm and the entire surveillance camera recording system. Following the robbery, the police scouted several areas across the parish in search of the men, but so far they have come up empty-handed. Investigators also reported that this is the second such robbery of a banking institution in White House, Westmoreland, within the last 7 months. In the meantime, the Westmoreland police have also commenced the search for a man who reportedly stabbed a 14-year-old teen almost to death yesterday afternoon. This after he attempted to rob the boy of his cell phone in Savannah Lamar. Reports from the police are that at approximately 10:30 a.m., the boy who had traveled to the Westmoreland Parish Court with his father was sitting in the passenger seat of his father's truck that was parked behind the courthouse when his cell phone rang. As soon as he answered the phone, a man reportedly crept up to the window of the vehicle and attempted to pull the cell phone from his hand. The teen resisted, and the robber brandished a knife and stabbed him multiple times before fleeing from the scene on foot. Eyewitnesses there raised an alarm and alerted the police, along with the boy's father, who was in court, and the wounded teen was rushed to the Savannah Lamar Hospital, where he was treated and admitted in serious condition. In other news tonight, the National Works Agency, NWA, has halted activities on a section of the Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project that is being implemented in St. Andrew, St. Thomas, and Portland. The agency says the decision was taken to suspend works along the Georgia to Cedar Valley leg of the project on the weekend, following threats received from what appears to be extortionists who are demanding bi-weekly advances if the project is to continue. It says the demands were made by way of a handwritten letter, neither the source nor authors of which were declared. The NWA says the work site was closed even while critical wall construction and revetment protection works were in progress along the badly deteriorated roadway. The NWA says that the matter was reported to the police, who are carrying out investigations. The agency noted that the works to be completed along the 15-kilometer-long Georgia to Cedar Valley contract package is very valuable. It explained that the roadway is earmarked for extensive reconstruction and improvement, including a new pavement, as well as the upgrading of existing drainage features and the construction of new ones, including culverts, the installation of shoulders in more rural areas, and new curbs, gutters, and sidewalks in built-up areas. And those are some of the stories making news. We will return with more stories making news as the PNP's Shadow Minister of Labor and Social Security, Senator Dr. Floyd Morris, is calling on the government to retable the Occupation Health and Safety Bill and appoint a new Joint Select Committee, JSC, to consider this legislation. And steps are currently being taken to reset the tourism sector to ensure that it benefits even more Jamaicans and fuels greater economic growth whenever the sector rebounds from the impact of the coronavirus. But first, we'll take a break, and then it's over to Christopher Scott with the latest in sports.